Hello everyone, and welcome to today's discussion video. Now, throughout history, and especially more in recent times, people have been predicting the so-called end of the world. And while some of us may become disturbed or worrisome about such predictions, others might believe none of it at all. In actuality, however, this is not so much a literal end, but instead a transformation from our current materialistic world to that of a spiritual society. Such a transformation would be so drastic, in fact, that when we look back at our past, there would have been so many changes that the two eras would appear unrecognizable. In essence, the previous world would seem to have disappeared, replaced by the new world. I'm going to explore all this and more in today's topic about the transformation to the universal culture. Now, as mentioned before, the replacement of our current materialist society to that of the future spiritual one will not be a sudden act of destruction and recreation. Instead, it will be a more gradual transformation. Now, from our current perspectives, it may seem like the world isn't changing at all from one day to the next, or even 1 year to the next. However, just because we're unable to perceive the changes happening on the grand scale of the world doesn't mean that they aren't happening at all. So, how will this transformation occur? Well, in order to create a universal culture, we need to have something that is common to all people, something that can transcend and overcome the boundaries dividing the various nations, cultures, and peoples of the world. So, what can do this? It is the eternal, unchanging truth, that which exists both outside of us and yet also exists within each of us. In other words, it can be described as love, compassion, loving kindness, etc. These things can transcend borders and bring all people together. Now, to illustrate this, I'd like to give an example through a story, which might sound familiar to some of you. In this story, a man travels to both heaven and hell to see how the two realms differ. He first travels to hell, where he sees a large table filled with delicious food. However, he notices that all the people seated around the table look very miserable, with thin, starving bodies, despite the large meal set before them. As it turns out, all of the utensils at the table are very long. Too long, in fact, for anyone to be able to feed themselves. As a result, everyone at the table is constantly trying and failing to feed themselves, creating a perpetual state of misery. The man continues on his journey, which now takes him to heaven. Here he sees another banquet on a table, equally surrounded by diners. However, these people all have very pleasant expressions on their faces, with nice, filled bodies to match. Clearly, these people are able to feed very well from the meal before them. But to the man's surprise, he sees that these diners are using the exact same long utensils as were used in hell. How could this be? Well, as you might have guessed, the trick lay not with the long utensils, but in the diners themselves. Specifically, the mindset that each person had in mind when confronted by their situation. In hell, each person was focused solely on, how can I feed myself? With no consideration for the feelings of those around them. As a result, they all failed to feed themselves and all became very miserable. By contrast, in heaven, each person instead focused on the well-being of their fellow man, thinking, how can I ensure my neighbors can enjoy this meal, even if I cannot? And with this mindset, each person used their utensils to feed the person across from them. And as a result of this environment of selflessness that they created, all were able to eat well. So what lesson can we gain from this story? It is that we must create a mindset and culture of love and selflessness, wherein we always think about what we can do for others, even if we cannot expect anything in return, whether immediately or in the long term. As President John F. Kennedy once famously said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." As these words and the aforementioned story teach us, when we care for each other, we can overcome all boundaries and obstacles. So to conclude, love, caring, and compassion are the eternal truths within us. And as more and more people begin to awaken spiritually, they will contemplate deeply about our spiritual identities, as well as the truths both in the world around us and within ourselves. And as more people come to recognize the truths such as loving kindness, they will begin the transformation from selfish materialism to selfless spirituality, not only within themselves, but also in the world around them. This is a transformation that we all must go through, and while we may encounter hardships or growing pains along the way, remember, it's not the end of the world. We're simply going through the transformation necessary for our growth and transition. So thank you all for listening, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.